The Book of Job. A complete narrative from birth to death. Long before the rise of Israel's kingdoms, before the Pillars of Hercules were sung by mariners, there lay a land called Uz. It stretched from the edge of Edom's red mountains eastward toward the great emptiness where the sun first scorched the morning sands. Travelers from Egypt to Mesopotamia knew Uz for its deep wells, its caravans heavy with frankincense and myrrh, and for one family that ruled over the rolling pastures like a kingdom of shepherds and sages. The land was not large, but it was rich. Winter rains turned the wadis into rushing silver threads. Spring painted the hills with wild anemones and poppies. Summer brought heat shimmering off basalt cliffs, but the oases remained cool under date palms. Autumn was the season of harvest and of marriage, when the air smelled of pressed grapes and roasted lamb. In this land, a man named Eluzai and his wife, a quiet woman named Jemima, not to be confused with his later daughter, had prayed for a child for 20 years. They were of the lineage of Esau through a branch that had stayed in Seir but later migrated north. Their home was a compound of limestone and cedar, surrounded by pens for sheep and goats. Eluzai was known as a righteous judge among the clans, settling disputes about water rights and grazing lands with wisdom that people said came from the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, though Abraham had been dust for generations. Jemima was barren, and the shame of it clung to her like a thorny cloak. Women would look away when she passed. Young mothers whispered, but Jemima did not turn to the household idols that some in Uz kept in niches near the hearth. Instead, she would climb to the flat roof of the house under the stars and pray to the unseen God, the one who had spoken to Noah, to Abraham, to the wandering patriarchs. One night, when the constellation of Orion stood directly overhead, an old man came to the gate of their compound. He was a sojourner from the south, his beard white with years, his eyes the color of ancient olive wood. He asked for water and bread, and Eluzai gave him both, as was the custom of honor in Uz. Then the old man said, "Your wife will conceive. The child shall be named Iyov. Where is the father? Because he will spend his life seeking the answer to that question, and in seeking, he will find that the father is closer than his own breath." The old man vanished the next morning, leaving no footprints in the dust. 9 months later, in the season when the first lambs were dropped, Jemima cried out in labor. The midwives came, 2 stout women who had delivered half the children of Uz. The birth was hard. For 2 days, Jemima lay in the birthing tent, sweating and bleeding, while Eluzai paced outside under the terebinth tree. On the 3rd day, as the sun broke over Mount Selah, a boy's cry cut through the air, strong, angry, full of life. They named him Iyov, which in the tongue of Uz meant persecuted, or hated, but also carried the older meaning of returning to God. Some whispered that the name was an ill omen. Others said it was a prophecy. Job grew like a young lion. By age 5, he could recite the genealogies of his tribe back 14 generations. By 7, he could read the ancient script carved on a stele that stood near the great well, an inscription that told of a flood and a man who built an ark. His father hired a tutor from Sheba, a man named Heman who was said to have learned the secrets of the stars from the Chaldeans. Heman taught Job not only reading and writing but also the art of disputation, how to argue a point from first principles, how to distinguish a logical fallacy from a true syllogism. Job's mother taught him something else. She taught him to listen. The voice of God is not always in the thunder, Jemima would say, as she spun wool by the lamp. Sometimes it is in the silence between the thunderclaps. Sometimes it is in the cry of a hungry lamb or the sigh of an old man sitting alone at his gate. By the time Job was a teenager, he had developed a reputation for both brilliance and compassion. He could calculate the yield of a field in bushels per acre better than any steward. He could predict the weather by observing the flight of birds and the color of the sunset. But he was also known to stop a caravan to help a camel with a thorn in its foot. He once spent 3 days searching for a lost child of a servant, refusing to eat until the boy was found sleeping in a hollow sycamore. At 15, Job had a vision. It came in the night, not in a dream but in a waking trance. He saw the heavens opened and a ladder set upon the earth, its top reaching to the clouds. Angels were ascending and descending, and at the top stood a figure of light so bright that Job could not look directly at it. A voice said, "This is the way of the righteous. They ascend through suffering and descend through mercy. You will walk both directions before your days are done." When Job told his father about the vision, Eluzai wept. My son, he said, you have been chosen for a hard road. But remember, the finest gold is tested in the hottest fire, and the strongest rope is made of threads that were twisted under tension. At 20, Job married a woman from the land of Teman, a region known for its wise men and its fierce warriors. Her name was Sidis, in some traditions called Sididos, and she was the daughter of a chieftain who had once entertained the queen of Sheba. Sidis had dark hair that fell to her waist, eyes that could flash with fire or soften with mercy, and a tongue as sharp as a flint knife. She loved Job not because he was rich or handsome, though he was both, but because he treated her as an equal, consulting her on every decision of their growing household. The early years of their marriage were a whirlwind of prosperity.
Job's father died peacefully in his bed, blessing Job with his final words, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But the love of the Lord is the completion of it." Do not stop at wisdom's beginning. Job inherited the estate and immediately doubled its size. He negotiated treaties with neighboring tribes, opened new trade routes to the copper mines of Timnah, and built a reservoir that could hold enough water to sustain the entire region through a 3-year drought. His flocks multiplied beyond counting. The shepherds said that no wolf ever took a lamb from Job's herds, and no disease ever touched his cattle. His camels were famous across the desert, strong, swift, and sure-footed. Merchants would pay double the market price for a single one of Job's camels, knowing they would never fail on the long journey across the Arabian sands. But Job's greatest wealth was his children. Sidis bore him 7 sons and 3 daughters. The sons were named 1. Eliab, the firstborn, bold and handsome as a cedar. 2. Abidan, the second, quiet and thoughtful, who loved to study the law. 3. Shadur, the third, a warrior who could bend a bow of bronze. 4. Zurishaddai, the fourth, a builder who designed magnificent terraces. 5. Gamaliel, the fifth, a merchant with a golden touch. 6. Shalumiel, the sixth, a poet who sang the psalms of creation. 7. Ahira, the seventh, a jester who made everyone laugh, even Job on his darkest days. The daughters were named 1. Keziah, after the fragrant spice, for her sweetness. 2. Jemimah, named after Job's mother, for her warmth. 3. Keren-happuch, meaning horn of antimony powder, a cosmetic used to brighten eyes, for her beauty. The family was the envy of Uz. Every year, the sons would host a feast in turn, rotating through their homes. The feasts would last 7 days, filled with music, dancing, storytelling, and the finest food and wine. Job, ever watchful for sin, would rise early on the morning after each feast and offer burnt offerings for each of his children, saying to the priest, "Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." He did this continually. Job's status as the greatest of all the people of the East was not merely about wealth. It was about honor. When 2 kings went to war, they often asked Job to mediate. When a famine struck a distant land, Job's granaries were opened first. When a widow needed justice, Job's gate was the first she ran to. He sat among the elders at the city gate, and his word carried more weight than a royal decree. Let me pause here to describe a typical day in Job's life before the testing. The reader must understand what was lost, and why the loss was so staggering. Job would wake before dawn, while the morning star still hung over the eastern hills. He would wash his hands and face in a silver basin, dress in a linen robe with a woolen cloak for the cool morning air, and walk to a small grove of olive trees behind his house. There, facing Jerusalem, though the temple had not yet been built, he would kneel on a flat stone worn smooth by decades of prayer. His prayers were not formal recitations. They were conversations. "God of my fathers," he would whisper, "thank you for the breath in my lungs. Thank you for the dew on the grass. Thank you for my wife sleeping in our bed, for my children dreaming in theirs. And thank you for the day ahead, whatever it brings." After prayer, Job would eat a simple breakfast of bread, cheese, and figs, then walk to the city gate. The gate of Uz was a massive structure of hewn stone, with benches cut into the walls where the elders sat in judgment. Job would take his seat and hear cases until noon. He never took a bribe. He never showed favoritism to the rich or contempt for the poor. Once, a powerful merchant tried to slip him a pouch of gold coins to rule in his favor. Job threw the pouch back in his face and said, "Do you think I am God, that I can pervert justice? Or do you think God is blind, that he will not see your bribe?" The poor loved Job. He had a standing order that any orphan, widow, or foreigner who came to his gate would be given food, clothing, and a place to sleep. He personally tended to the wounds of travelers beaten by robbers. He would not sleep if he knew of a single person in his territory who went to bed hungry. "If I have denied the desires of the poor," he would say, "or let the widow's eyes grow weary while I feasted, then let my arm fall from its socket and my shoulder be broken." After the noon meal, Job would inspect his estates. He knew every shepherd by name, every camel's temperament, every spring's flow rate. He would walk the boundaries of his land, repairing stone walls himself rather than ordering a servant to do it. He believed that prosperity came from attention to small things. "A neglected fence leads to a strayed sheep," he taught his sons. "A strayed sheep leads to a lost hour. A lost hour leads to a lost day. A lost day leads to a lost year. And lost years lead to a lost life." In the evening, Job would gather his family for a meal. They would eat together, laugh together, and discuss the events of the day. Job was a strict but loving father. He never struck his children, but he could silence them with a look. He never raised his voice, but he could make a grown man weep with a quiet question. His children adored him. Even the rebellious ones, and there were moments of rebellion, as with any family, knew that their father's love was absolute and unconditional. The household went to sleep with singing. Every night, one of the servants would play a lyre, and Job would sing a psalm he had composed. One of those psalms survived in fragments, passed down through oral tradition, and some scholars believe it influenced the later Psalter. "The Lord is my shepherd, and I want nothing more. He makes me lie down in green pastures, not because I am tired, but because I need to rest in his presence. He leads me beside quiet waters, not because I am lost, but because I need to listen to his voice. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow, I will not fear evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Asterisk. The reader will recognize the echoes of that song in the 23rd Psalm. But in Job's house, it was sung every night for decades, long before David was born. Now, the narrative shifts to a realm beyond human sight. The book of Job gives us a glimpse behind the veil, and for the purposes of this expanded telling, we will explore that glimpse in depth. There came a day when the sons of God, the Bene Elohim, the celestial beings who serve as ministers and messengers in the divine court, presented themselves before the Lord. This was a regular assembly, a kind of cosmic convocation, where the angels gave an account of their activities and received new assignments. The throne of glory blazed with such intensity that the seraphim covered their faces with 2 wings and their feet with 2 wings, crying out, "Holy, holy, holy," in a perpetual cascade of praise. Among the sons of God was one whose name was Satan, not a proper name but a title, the adversary, the accuser, the prosecutor. He was not yet the fallen angel of later Christian tradition. In the book of Job, Satan is a member of the divine court, a kind of celestial district attorney whose job is to patrol the earth and report on human wickedness. He is like a prosecutor who looks for evidence of wrongdoing, and he is cynical by profession. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered, "From roaming throughout the earth and going back and forth on it." This was his job, walking the earth, observing human behavior, gathering evidence for the prosecution. Then the Lord asked a question that would set in motion the greatest drama in the history of one human soul: have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, he is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Satan's answer was immediate and sharp. Does Job fear God for nothing? The accuser's logic was brutal and persuasive. Job's piety is a calculated investment. He serves God because God has built a hedge of protection around him, his family, and his property. God has blessed the work of his hands. Of course Job is righteous, righteousness pays. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, Satan challenged, and he will surely curse you to your face. This was the wager. Not a gamble in the human sense, but a cosmic test of the nature of authentic faith. Is virtue its own reward, or is it merely a means to an end? Does Job love God for God's own sake, or does he love God for the benefits? The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Satan left the presence of the Lord, and the machinery of testing began to turn. It is important to understand that Job knew nothing of this heavenly conversation. From his perspective, life was normal, blessed, and good. The day of testing began like any other. Job woke before dawn, prayed in the olive grove, ate his bread and figs, and walked to the city gate. He heard a dispute between two farmers about an irrigation ditch, and he ruled that the water should be shared equally, with each taking turns for a week at a time. He then went to inspect the birth of a new litter of lambs. A ewe was struggling, and Job knelt in the straw, reached in with his bare hands, and turned the lamb so that it came out alive. He named the lamb Grace and gave it to his youngest daughter, Karen Happuch, who was then 12 years old. Meanwhile, a series of messengers was traveling toward him, each one bearing news of catastrophe. The first messenger arrived as Job was washing the blood and afterbirth from his hands at a trough. The man was gasping, his clothes torn, dust caked on his face. The oxen were plowing, he cried, and the donkeys were grazing nearby, when the Sabaeans attacked. They made off with the animals and killed all your servants with the edge of the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Job stood frozen for a moment. The Sabaeans were a nomadic raiding people from the south, known for their swift horsemanship and their cruelty. Job had traded with them peacefully for years. But now, for reasons he could not understand, they had broken their treaties. Before he could respond, a second messenger arrived. This one was even more disheveled, his clothes singed. The fire of God fell from the sky, he screamed. It burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. The fire of God, perhaps lightning, perhaps a meteor shower, perhaps something else entirely. But the messenger called it divine fire, and Job would remember that phrase. Then a third messenger. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties, he panted. They swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Job's knees began to weaken. He had lost his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his camels, and dozens of faithful servants, all in the span of a few minutes. But he was still standing, still breathing, still holding on to his sanity by a thread. Then the fourth messenger came. This one was the worst. He was weeping openly, his face streaked with tears and dust. Your sons and daughters, he sobbed. They were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house. And suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert. It struck the 4 corners of the house. The house collapsed on the young people. They are all dead. Every single one. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. At that, Job fell. Not in a faint or a swoon, but in a deliberate act of grief. He tore his robe, a costly garment of embroidered linen, rent from collar to hem. He shaved his head, scraping the razor across his scalp until the hair fell in clumps around him. These were the traditional signs of mourning in the ancient Near East, gestures that said, everything I had is gone, and I am nothing. Then he fell to the ground. Not onto a cushion or a bed, but onto the hard-packed earth, his face pressed into the dust. And from that position of utter abasement, he worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The narrator of the biblical text pauses to make a point. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. But Satan was not satisfied. The accuser returned to the heavenly council, and again the Lord asked, "Where have you come from?" And again Satan answered, "From roaming throughout the earth and going back and forth on it." The Lord said, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." Satan's response was even more cynical than before. "Skin for skin," he sneered. "A man will give up everything he has to save his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and his bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The accuser's logic was that physical suffering is the ultimate test. A person might endure the loss of property and even the loss of children, but when the body itself is tortured, the spirit breaks. Pain is the great revealer of truth. No one can maintain piety while covered in boils. The Lord said, "Very well, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." Satan left the presence of the Lord and descended to Uz. That night, as Job lay on the ground where he had fallen, unable to sleep, unwilling to eat, a strange sensation began in his hands. It started as an itch, then a burning, then a sharp stabbing pain. He looked at his palms and saw red welts rising. Within an hour, the welts had turned into boils. Hard, swollen, pus-filled lesions that covered his skin from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The pain was indescribable. Modern medicine would diagnose a severe case of furunculosis, possibly compounded by an autoimmune reaction or a rare tropical disease. But Job had no diagnosis. He only had the agony of his flesh, the sight of his own skin rotting, and the sound of his wife weeping in the next room. He did the only thing he could think of. He got up, walked out of his house, and went to the ash heap outside the city walls. In ancient Uz, the ash heap was where the garbage was burned and dumped, broken pottery, animal bones, rotting vegetables, and the waste of the city. It was also where the outcasts gathered, lepers, the destitute, the mentally ill, those who had been declared ritually unclean. Job sat down among the ashes. He took a piece of broken pottery, a shard of a clay jar, and began to scrape his boils. The scraping brought a moment of relief, like scratching a mosquito bite, but it also broke the skin further, causing the sores to weep and bleed. He sat there for days. The sun baked him by day, the cold wind chilled him by night. The stench of the ash heap filled his nostrils. Flies buzzed around his open wounds. The only companions he had were the other outcasts, who kept their distance but occasionally left him a crust of bread or a cup of water. Sidis, Job's wife, came to him on the ash heap. She had aged 10 years in a week. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red from weeping. She stood at the edge of the garbage dump, unwilling to come closer because of the stench, but needing to speak to her husband. She said, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." This line is often misunderstood. It is not necessarily a suggestion of suicide, though that may be implied. In the ancient context, curse God and die could mean, if you are going to die anyway, you might as well get it over with by blaspheming God so that he will strike you down quickly. Or it could mean, your suffering is so unbearable that death would be a mercy, so why not provoke God to end it? But beneath the harsh words was a deeper pain. Sidis had lost her 10 children. Her husband was a ruin of a man. Her wealth was gone. Her future was a blank wall of despair. She was not being cruel, she was being honest. She had reached the end of her faith, and she wanted Job to join her there. But Job would not. He looked at her with eyes that were still bright despite the suffering, and he said, "You are talking like a foolish woman." shall we accept good from God, and not trouble? The narrator again affirms, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Cities turned and walked away. She did not abandon Job, but she retreated to the shell of their house, where she would spend her days in silence, weaving a funeral shroud for each of her children. According to the testament of Job, she eventually died of grief before Job's restoration, but other traditions say she lived to see his fortunes returned. News of Job's calamities spread across the region. When 3 of his friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard what had happened, they made an agreement: they would leave their homes and go to comfort Job. Eliphaz came from Teman, a city in Edom famous for its wise men. The prophet Jeremiah would later say, "Is wisdom no more in Teman? Has counsel perished from the prudent?" Eliphaz was an elder, perhaps 70 years old, with a long white beard and a reputation for seeing visions. He believed deeply in the doctrine of retribution: the righteous prosper, the wicked suffer, and everything happens for a reason that can be discovered by careful observation. Bildad came from Shua, a region near the Euphrates River. He was a traditionalist, a man who valued the sayings of the fathers above all else. Ask the former generations, he would say. Find out what their ancestors learned. Bildad was younger than Eliphaz, but he had the soul of an archivist. He believed that the answer to every problem could be found in the collected wisdom of the past. Zophar came from Naamah, a town whose location is now lost to history. He was the youngest of the 3, and the most dogmatic. Zophar did not deal in nuance or ambiguity. He saw the world in black and white. Good people are rewarded, bad people are punished. If you are suffering, you must have done something wrong. It was as simple as that. The 3 friends met at a crossroads outside Uz and entered the city together. They found Job on the ash heap, and the sight of him stopped them cold. The man they had known, the greatest man in the East, the pillar of the community, the judge whose word was law, was now a skeleton wrapped in weeping skin. His face was unrecognizable. His eyes were sunk deep in their sockets. His lips were cracked and bleeding. They did what the ancient custom required. They tore their robes in grief. They sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat down on the ground with Job, and for 7 days and 7 nights, none of them spoke a word. They simply sat with him in his misery. 7 days. Think about that. For a full week, 3 of the most articulate men in the ancient world sat in complete silence. They did not offer platitudes. They did not quote proverbs. They did not try to fix anything. They just sat. And that silence, according to many commentators, was the best thing they ever did for Job. But on the 8th day, Job broke the silence. His voice was cracked and hoarse from days of weeping, but he forced the words out. What came was not a prayer or a plea. It was a curse, a specific, directed, liturgical curse against the day he was born. He said, "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, a boy is conceived." He went on, "That day, let it be darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. May gloom and utter darkness claim it. May a cloud settle over it. May the blackness of the day terrify it. May darkness seize that night, may it not be included among the days of the year nor entered in any of the months." He cursed the day so thoroughly that he called upon professional cursers, those who are ready to rouse Leviathan, to darken its stars. He asked why he did not die at birth, why the knees received him, why the breasts gave him milk. For now, he said, would be lying down in peace, I would be asleep and at rest, with kings and rulers of the earth who built for themselves places now lying in ruins, with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. He asked, why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure? This lament is one of the most powerful expressions of human suffering ever written. It is not a sin to lament. Job is not cursing God, he is cursing his own birthday. He is giving voice to the unbearable weight of existence when existence has become nothing but pain. The friends listened in horror. They had come to comfort Job, but his words were not the words of a man who could be comforted. He was questioning the very order of the universe. And in their theological framework, that was dangerous. Eliphaz spoke first, carefully, gently, but with an underlying firmness. He could not allow Job's words to stand unchallenged, not because he was cruel, but because he believed that Job's despair was leading him toward blasphemy. If someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Eliphaz began. But who can keep from speaking? He reminded Job of his past righteousness. Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled, you have strengthened faltering knees. But now trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged, it strikes you, and you are dismayed. Then came the core of Eliphaz's argument. Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap the same. Eliphaz believed in the law of cosmic cause and effect. He had seen it with his own eyes. The wicked may prosper for a season, but eventually their house collapses. Conversely, the righteous may suffer for a season, but eventually they are delivered. Therefore, Job's suffering must be the result of some hidden sin. He even claimed to have received a revelation. A word was secretly brought to me, my ears caught a whisper of it. Amid disquieting dreams in the night, when deep sleep falls on people, fear and trembling seized me and made all my bones shake. A spirit glided past my face, and the hair on my body stood on end. In that vision, the spirit asked, "Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be more pure than his Maker?" Eliphaz concluded with an appeal, "Blessed is the one whom God corrects, so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. For he wounds, but he also binds up, he injures, but his hands also heal." In other words, Job, this suffering is discipline. Accept it, repent of whatever you did, and God will restore you. Job's response to Eliphaz was raw and emotional. He acknowledged that his words had been bitter, but he insisted that his suffering was out of proportion to any possible sin. "If only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery be placed on the scales," he cried. "It would surely outweigh the sand of the seas, no wonder my words have been impetuous." He then made a stunning request, "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant what I hope for, that God would be willing to crush me, to let loose his hand and cut off my life." Job was not suicidal in the modern sense, but he was desperate for an end to his pain. He wished for a swift death. He wished for God to act as an executioner rather than a torturer. Then he turned to his friends, "You have proved to be useless physicians. Is there any injustice on my tongue? Cannot my mouth discern malice?" He accused them of being afraid to help him, of holding back kindness because they were afraid of being associated with a sinner. "Anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty," he said. But then, in the midst of his anguish, Job turned again to God. And he said something remarkable, "What is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much attention, that you examine them every morning and test them every moment?" He felt like a target. "You have posted armed guards over me. I sin, what do I do to you, you who watch over all humanity? Why have you made me your mark? Have I become a burden to you?" But even in his complaint, Job could not stop speaking to God. He needed an answer. He needed a mediator. He needed someone to bridge the gap between his innocent suffering and God's mysterious justice. Bildad the Shuhite could not remain silent any longer. He was offended by Job's boldness, not because he lacked compassion, but because he believed that Job was attacking the very foundations of divine order. "How long will you say such things?" Bildad demanded. "Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right?" Bildad appealed to tradition, ask the former generation, find out what their ancestors learned. For we were born only yesterday and know nothing, our days on earth are but a shadow. He argued that Job's children must have sinned to die so suddenly. When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin, Bildad said, with a callousness that stuns modern readers. He was not trying to be cruel. He was simply stating what he believed to be an axiom of divine justice. But if you will seek God earnestly, Bildad continued, and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Bildad offered Job a simple bargain, repent and be restored. The only alternative was to continue suffering as a fool and a hypocrite. Surely God does not reject a blameless man or strengthen the hands of evildoers, he concluded. Job's response to Bildad was sarcastic and hurt. Doubtless you are the only people who matter, and wisdom will die with you, he shot back. But I have a mind as well as you, I am not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things? He then turned his attention back to God, and in one of the most famous passages in the book, he declared, though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. But Job immediately qualified this hope, I will surely defend my ways to his face. Indeed, this will turn out for my deliverance, for no godless person would dare come before him. Job was caught in a paradox. He was innocent, but he was suffering. He wanted to plead his case before God, but he was terrified of God. There is no one to mediate between us, someone to lay his hand on us both, he lamented. Then he began to experience a shift, the first glimmer of faith that would eventually sustain him through the darkest hours. How many are my iniquities and sins, he asked God directly. Why do you hide your face and consider me your enemy? But then, a person dies and is laid low, they breathe their last, and where are they? Yet if a tree is cut down, it will sprout again. But a person dies and is gone. If only you would hide me in the grave and conceal me till your anger has passed. Job was beginning to think about resurrection, not as a doctrine, but as a desperate hope. He wondered if after death, God might call him back. You will call and I will answer you, you will long for the creature your hands have made, he said. Zophar the Naamathite was the most aggressive of the three friends. He had been biting his tongue while Eliphaz and Bildad spoke, but now he erupted. Are all these words to go unanswered? Zophar demanded. Your idle talk has made everyone feel ashamed. You say to God, my beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight. But oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and reveal to you the secrets of wisdom. Zophar accused Job of being a windbag who thought he knew everything. Know therefore that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves, he said. In other words, whatever you think you're suffering, it's actually less than what you deserve. He offered Job a way out. If you put away the sin that is in your hand and allow no evil to dwell in your tent, then you will lift up your face without shame, you will stand firm and without fear. And then Zophar painted a picture of the wicked person. The one who, like Job, pretends to be innocent but is secretly corrupt. But the eyes of the wicked will fail, and escape will elude them, their hope will become a dying gasp. Job listened in silence. He was too exhausted to respond immediately. But inside, a fire was building, a fire of righteous indignation that would soon erupt in the most powerful defense of his innocence ever spoken. When Job finally responded to Zophar, he unleashed a torrent of bitter irony. Doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you, he said again, mocking their self-assuredness. But I have understanding as well as you, I am not inferior to you. Who does not know such things as these? He then made a devastating comparison, I have become a laughingstock to my friends, though I called on God and he answered, a mere laughingstock, though righteous and blameless. He accused his friends of being worthless physicians, who were smearing him with lies. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for him? He asked. Will you show him partiality? Will you argue the case for God? This was a radical accusation. Job was saying that his friends were not defending God, they were defending a theological system that was wrong. They were so committed to their doctrine of retribution that they were willing to lie about Job's character to make the doctrine work. Then Job turned again to God. "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him," he said. But he immediately added, "I will surely defend my ways to his face." He asked for two things from God: first, that God would stop terrifying him; second, that God would tell him what his sins were. "How many wrongs and sins have I committed? Show me my offense and my sin." In the absence of an answer from God, Job began to reflect on the fragility of human life. Mortals, born of woman, are of few days and full of trouble. They spring up like flowers and wither away, like fleeting shadows, they do not endure. He looked at a tree that had been cut down, and saw hope. "At the scent of water, it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant," he said. But a human being. When a person dies, they are laid low, they breathe their last, and where are they? Yet even in this despair, Job held on to a thread of hope that there might be life after death. "If only you would hide me in the grave and conceal me until your anger has passed. If only you would set a time for me and then remember me." He was not certain of resurrection. He was hoping for it. He was crying out for it. And in that cry, he became a pioneer of the faith, one of the first people in Scripture to articulate a hope beyond the grave. Eliphaz was offended by Job's self-defense. He thought Job was being arrogant, claiming a purity that no human could possess. Would a wise person answer with empty notions or fill their belly with the hot east wind? Eliphaz asked. "You are doing away with the fear of God and hindering meditation before him." Then Eliphaz launched into a long description of the fate of the wicked. His description was vivid and terrifying: "The wicked man writhes in pain all his days. The terrors of death overwhelm him. He wanders about for food, knowing that the day of darkness is near. Distress and anguish fill him with terror." Eliphaz's point was clear: "Job, if you were really innocent, you wouldn't be suffering like this. The fact that you are suffering proves that you are wicked." Its logic as straightforward as a syllogism. Major premise: the righteous prosper and the wicked suffer. Minor premise: you are suffering. Conclusion: you are wicked. But Job knew he was not wicked. And so the logic failed at its first premise. Not all righteous people prosper. Not all wicked people suffer. Sometimes the innocent suffer, and the guilty go free. This is the scandal of the book of Job. Job's response to Eliphaz's second speech is one of the most heartbreaking passages in all of literature. He began by saying, "I have heard many things like these, you are miserable comforters, all of you." He told them, "If you were in my place, I would heap up words against you and shake my head at you. But my mouth would encourage you, comfort from my lips would bring you relief." In other words, if our positions were reversed, I would not treat you the way you are treating me. I would show you compassion, not condemnation. Then Job turned back to God, and his words became a desperate plea for a mediator. "My spirit is broken, my days are cut short, the grave awaits me. Surely mockers surround me. My eyes must dwell on their hostility." He asked God, "Give me, O God, the pledge you demand. Who else will put up security for me?" And then came the most famous line in the entire book: "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I, and not another. How my heart yearns within me." This is a declaration of faith that transcends the immediate circumstances. Job does not know how it will happen. He does not know when. But he knows that there is a Redeemer, a Goel, a kinsman redeemer, the one who in ancient Israelite law would avenge a wronged relative and restore their name. And this Redeemer lives. Job is saying, even if God kills me, even if my skin rots off my bones, even if I am buried in the dust, I will see God. I will stand before him. And I will be vindicated. This is not resurrection as later Christians would understand it. It is more primitive, more raw. But it is faith, faith that the relationship between Job and God is not ended by death, but somehow, mysteriously, continues. Bildad was unmoved by Job's declaration of faith. He responded with a short, sharp speech about how the lamp of the wicked is snuffed out. Surely the light of the wicked is snuffed out, the flame of his fire stops burning, Bildad said. The vigor of his step is weakened, his own schemes throw him down. He described a man who falls into a net, who is seized by the feet and ensnared, who is trapped by a noose hidden on the ground. Terrors startle him on every side and dog his every step. Bildad's message was, Job, your lamp has gone out. Your vigor is gone. Terrors surround you. This is the fate of the wicked. Therefore, you must be wicked. Job responded with exasperation. How long will you torment me and crush me with your words, he demanded. 10 times now you have reproached me. Shamelessly you attack me. He insisted again on his innocence. I know that my Redeemer lives, he repeated the line, doubling down on his faith. If it is true that I have gone astray, my error remains my concern alone. He then warned his friends, you should fear the sword yourselves, for wrath will bring punishment by the sword, and then you will know that there is judgment. Zophar could not resist jumping back into the fray. He began with irritation. My troubled thoughts prompt me to answer because I am greatly disturbed. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. He then launched into a meditation on the brief prosperity of the wicked. Surely you know how it has been from of old, he said. The triumph of the wicked is short, and the joy of the godless lasts but a moment. He described a man who rises to great heights, whose feet are washed in milk, whose bones are full of youthful vigor. But then, suddenly, it all collapses. In the fullness of his sufficiency, he will be in distress. The hand of everyone in misery will come against him. Zophar's point was that Job's former prosperity was a sign of his wickedness, because the wicked are allowed to flourish for a season, only to be destroyed. This is the wicked man's portion from God, Zophar concluded. Job's response to Zophar was a masterful refutation of the entire theology of retribution. He pointed to the real world. The world that his friends were ignoring. Listen carefully to my words, Job said. Bear with me while I speak. I am complaining about my unending pain, but I am not complaining to you. My complaint is to God. Then he asked a devastating question, why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? They see their children established around them, their offspring before their eyes. Their homes are safe and free from fear, the rod of God is not on them. He described the wicked. They spend their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace. They say to God, leave us alone. We have no desire to know your ways. Job pointed out the uncomfortable truth, the wicked often do prosper. They do not suffer in this life. Their houses are safe, their children are healthy, and they die peacefully in their beds. Meanwhile, the righteous often suffer. The houses of the wicked are safe, but not Job's house, he said bitterly. The wicked are spared from the day of calamity, but not Job. He concluded, so how can you console me with your nonsense? Nothing is left of your answers but falsehood. Eliphaz, desperate to find something concrete to accuse Job of, began to invent sins. Is not your wickedness great? Are not your sins endless? He asked. Then he made specific accusations. You demanded security from your relatives for no reason, you stripped people of their clothing, leaving them naked. You gave no water to the weary and you withheld food from the hungry. There was no evidence for these accusations. Eliphaz was grasping at straws. He was so committed to the doctrine that suffering is punishment that he was willing to slander his friend to make the doctrine work. Yet you say, what does God know? Does he judge through such darkness? Eliphaz continued. But God knows the secrets of your heart. He then gave Job a prescription for restoration: submit to God and be at peace with him, in this way prosperity will come to you. Accept instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored. Job's response to Eliphaz's third speech was not a refutation of the accusations. He had given up on convincing his friends. Instead, he poured out his heart's deepest longing, to find God and present his case. Even today my complaint is bitter, his hand is heavy in spite of my groaning, Job said. If only I knew where to find him, if only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Job was confident that if he could just get a hearing with God, he would be vindicated. I would find out what he would answer me, and consider what he would say to me. Would he vigorously oppose me? No, he would not press charges against me. There the upright can establish their innocence before him. But then came the despair: but if I go to the east, he is not there; if I go to the west, I do not find him. When he is at work in the north, I catch no glimpse of him; when he turns to the south, I see him not. God was hidden. Job could not find him. And yet, he knows the way that I take; when he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps, I have kept to his way without turning aside. This is one of the most beautiful expressions of trust in the entire Bible. Job does not see God. He cannot find God. But he knows that God knows him. And he is certain that the testing will end with him emerging as gold. In one of the most socially conscious passages of the book, Job turned his attention away from his own suffering to the suffering of others. He described the injustices that happen every day in a fallen world. There are those who move boundary stones, they pasture flocks they have stolen. They drive away the orphan's donkey and take the widow's ox in pledge. They thrust the needy from the path and force all the poor of the land into hiding. He described the poor who are forced to work in the fields for starvation wages, who go naked for lack of clothing, who are drenched by mountain rains and huddle against the rocks for shelter. And yet, Job observed, God seems to do nothing about these injustices. God charges no one with wrongdoing, he lamented. But Job's faith did not collapse. He concluded, the grave consumes the sinner and the righteous alike, but God's eyes are on the ways of mortals, he sees their every step. There is no dark shadow, no deep darkness, where evildoers can hide. God sees. Job held on to that. Even when God does not act immediately, God sees. And that seeing carries with it the promise of eventual justice. Bildad's third speech is the shortest in the book, only 6 verses. He seemed to be running out of arguments. All he could do was repeat the old theology: dominion and awe belong to God, he establishes order in the heights of heaven. How then can a mortal be righteous before God? How can one born of woman be pure? Job did not even bother to respond directly. He let the words hang in the air, then continued his own meditation. Job responded to Bildad's weak speech with a powerful ode to God's majesty. How you have helped the powerless. How you have saved the arm that is feeble, he said sarcastically. What advice you have offered to one without wisdom. And what great insight you have displayed. Then he turned to a genuine description of God's power. He spreads out the northern skies over empty space, he suspends the earth over nothing. He wraps up the waters in his clouds, yet the clouds do not burst under their weight. He covers the face of the full moon, spreading his clouds over it. He marks out the horizon on the face of the waters for a boundary between light and darkness. This is breathtaking poetry. Job was saying, I know how powerful God is. I know he can do all these things. But that power does not explain my suffering. The mystery remains. Zophar did not speak again. Instead, Job continued his defense, swearing an oath of innocence that would later be echoed in the legal traditions of many cultures. As surely as God lives, who has denied me justice, the Almighty, who has made my life bitter, as long as I have life within me, the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter a lie. He then made a declaration that has echoed through the centuries. Till I die, I will not deny my integrity. I will maintain my innocence and never let go of it. My conscience will not reproach me as long as I live. This is the heart of the book of Job. It is not about prosperity. It is not about suffering as punishment. It is about integrity, about refusing to confess to sins you have not committed, even when it would make your life easier. Job would rather suffer with integrity than be restored through a lie. The dialogue between Job and his friends now comes to an end. The book inserts a beautiful hymn to wisdom, a poem that may have been written by Job himself or added by the author as an interlude. Surely there is a mine for silver, and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth, and copper is smelted from ore. But where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? The poem describes how humans can dig deep into the earth, extract precious metals, and cut tunnels through rock. But wisdom cannot be bought with gold or silver. It cannot be weighed out for rubies or topaz. The price of wisdom is above rubies. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds of the sky. Destruction and death say, only a rumor of it has reached our ears. The answer, God understands the way to it and He alone knows where it dwells. For He views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. And He said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. This poem serves as a transition. Job has been seeking wisdom, the wisdom to understand his suffering. The poem suggests that true wisdom is not found in human reasoning but in humble reverence for God. Job then launched into a long, bittersweet reminiscence of his former life. He remembered the days when God watched over him, when his lamp shone brightly, when he walked through the darkness by God's light. Oh, for the days when I was in my prime, when God's intimate friendship blessed my house, when the Almighty was still with me and my children were around me, when my path was drenched with cream and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil. He remembered the respect He commanded. When I went to the city gate and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and stepped aside, the old men rose to their feet, the chief men refrained from speaking and covered their mouths with their hands. He remembered His justice. I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I took up the case of the stranger. He remembered thinking that he would die in his own house, his days as numerous as the grains of sand, his roots reaching the water, the dew lying on his branches all night. But then the memory snapped, and Job returned to his present reality. But now they mock me, men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. He described the scum of society, men so worthless that they were driven from the land, forced to live in the desert, chewing on roots, crying out in the bushes. And these men now mock Job. They sing songs about him. They spit in his face. God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, Job said. He has thrown me into the mud, and I am reduced to dust and ashes. He described his physical suffering. Night pierces my bones, my gnawing pains never rest. My skin grows black and peels. My body burns with fever. My lyre is tuned to mourning, and my pipe to the sound of weeping. In the longest and most powerful speech of the entire book, Job swore a legal oath of innocence. He called down curses upon himself if he had committed any of the sins his friends had implied. I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman, he began. If I have walked with falsehood or my foot has hurried after deceit, let God weigh me in honest scales and He will know that I am blameless. He went through a list of potential sins. If I have been unfaithful to my wife, he describes adultery as a fire that burns to the grave. If I have denied justice to my servants, remembering that God made us all from the same clay. If I have refused help to the poor or let the widow's eyes grow weary. If I have eaten my bread alone without sharing with the orphan. If I have seen the naked without clothing them. If I have put my trust in gold or called the precious stone my confidence. If I have worshipped the sun or the moon, a secret sin worthy of punishment. If I have rejoiced at my enemy's misfortune. If I have failed to give my servants a fair hearing. If I have hidden my sin as Adam did. After each accusation, Job called down a curse. Then let my arm fall from my shoulder, let it be broken from its socket. Then let briars come up instead of wheat, and stinkweed instead of barley. He concluded, the words of Job are ended. Job had said everything he had to say. He had maintained his integrity. He had not cursed God. He had not confessed sins he did not commit. He had laid his case before the bar of heaven, and now he waited for God's response. At this point, a new voice enters the conversation. Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, had been listening to the entire debate. He was younger than Job and his 3 friends, and he had held back out of respect for their age. But now, seeing that the 3 friends had no answer for Job, his anger burned. He was angry with Job for justifying himself rather than God. He was angry with Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar for failing to refute Job and for condemning him without evidence. Elihu's speech is long, 6 chapters. And is sometimes seen as a preview of God's own speech. He argues that suffering is not always punishment, it can be a divine warning or a lesson. God speaks through suffering, Elihu says, to keep people from pride and to save them from the pit. He also argues that God is beyond human comprehension. God is greater than we can know, Elihu says. The number of his years is unsearchable. But Elihu makes a crucial point, it is unthinkable that God would do wrong, that the Almighty would pervert justice. He then argues that God does not need to explain his actions to anyone. If he calls back the spirit he created, every living thing would perish together and humanity would return to dust. Elihu's speech is a bridge between human arguments and divine revelation. He does not solve the problem of suffering, but he reframes it. Perhaps suffering is not about punishment but about God's mysterious purposes. Then, finally, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Not a still small voice, not a gentle whisper, but a storm. The clouds gathered over Uz, swirling in a funnel of wind and fire. The ash heap trembled. The outcasts fled. And Job, covered in boils and dust, heard the voice of the Almighty. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me. God did not apologize. God did not explain why Job had suffered. Instead, God asked questions, question after question, designed to humble human pride and reveal the infinite gap between creator and creature. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? The questions continued for 4 chapters. They covered the entire scope of creation. The sea, who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt. The dawn. Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The depths, have you entered the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? The stars, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons or lead out the bear with its cubs? The weather, do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens? The animals, God then turned to the animal kingdom, describing creatures that no human can tame or understand. The lion, who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? The mountain goat and the doe, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? The wild donkey, who let the wild donkey go free? Who untied its ropes? The wild ox, will the wild ox consent to serve you? Will it stay by your manger at night? The ostrich, she treats her young harshly, as if they were not hers, she laughs at the horse and its rider. The horse, do you give the horse its strength or clothe its neck with a flowing mane? Do you make it leap like a locust, striking terror with its proud snorting? The hawk and the eagle, does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? God saved two creatures for the climax of his speech. The first is Behemoth, a creature of the land, described as the first among the works of God. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar, the sinews of its thighs are close-knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. Some scholars see Behemoth as a hippopotamus or an elephant. Others see it as a mythical creature, a symbol of untamable power. Either way, the point is clear, God creates things that are beyond human control. The second creature is Leviathan, a creature of the sea, a dragon, a twisting serpent. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on all that are haughty. It is king over all that are proud. Leviathan represents chaos, danger, and the wildness of creation. And God says, I made this creature, too. I can handle it. Can you? After the whirlwind fell silent, Job answered the Lord. He did not offer a defense. He did not demand an explanation. He simply bowed. I know that you can do all things, no purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. He continued, you said, listen now, and I will speak, I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Job's repentance is not for sins he had committed, he was still blameless. His repentance is for his presumption in demanding that God explain himself. He had seen God. He had heard the voice of the Almighty. And in that encounter, his questions melted away. Not because they were answered, but because they were absorbed into a greater reality, the reality of God's presence. After Job had spoken, the Lord turned his attention to Eliphaz the Temanite. I am angry with you and your two friends, God said, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. This is a stunning reversal. Job's friends thought they were defending God, but they were actually misrepresenting him. They had claimed that suffering is always punishment, that God always rewards the righteous in this life, and that Job must be guilty. But God says they were wrong. Job was right, not about everything, but about his insistence on his innocence and his refusal to accept false guilt. So now, God told Eliphaz, take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. Job prayed for his friends. And the Lord restored his fortunes. The restoration was not gradual. It was immediate and overwhelming. The text says, the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. Every single thing that Job had lost was doubled. Instead of 7,000 sheep, he received 14,000 sheep. Instead of 3,000 camels, he received 6,000 camels. Instead of 500 yoke of oxen, he received 1,000 yoke of oxen. Instead of 500 donkeys, he received 1,000 donkeys. But the doubling of children was different. Job received 7 new sons and 3 new daughters, the same number as before. Why not double? Because his original 10 children were not lost forever. In the economy of God, they were still Job's children. They were not replaced, they were added to. Job now had 20 children, 10 in heaven and 10 on earth. The book of Job makes a special note of Job's new daughters. Nowhere in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters, the text says. Their names were Jemimah, meaning dove or warmth. Keziah, meaning cinnamon. Keren-happuch, meaning horn of antimony powder, a cosmetic used to brighten eyes. These names are significant. Unlike many ancient texts that only name sons, the book of Job records the names of the daughters. And in a culture where daughters did not normally inherit property, Job gave his daughters an inheritance along with their brothers. This detail shows that Job's character had not been destroyed by his suffering. He was still the same man, blameless, upright, generous, and just. His wealth was restored, but more importantly, his values were intact. The final verse of the book of Job tells us, after this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. And so Job died, an old man and full of days. If Job was around 70 at the time of his testing, the age of full strength in the ancient world, then he lived to be about 210 years old. This is a patriarchal lifespan, reminiscent of Abraham and Isaac. He saw great-great-grandchildren. He attended weddings, births, and celebrations. He taught his descendants the lessons he had learned in the ash heap. According to the testament of Job, Job reigned as a king over Egypt for a time before his death, and he passed on his wisdom to his sons. But the Bible is content to say simply, he died, old and full of days. Job's story did not end with his death. It echoed through the centuries. The prophet Ezekiel would later mention Job alongside Noah and Daniel as one of the 3 most righteous men in history, Ezekiel 14 verse 14. The New Testament's James would say, "You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about," James 5 verse 11. But Job's greatest legacy is not his wealth or his longevity or even his children. It is his question, the question that every suffering human being has asked in every generation.